A lie is a living, breathing entity. If you feed it just enough truth, dress it in the right clothes, and give it a title, it will eventually stand on its own 2 feet and walk right past the smartest men in the room. The greatest illusions in history never required smoke, trapdoors, or magic wands. They only required a mirror, carefully angled to reflect a man's deepest insecurities and his insatiable greed. This is not a lesson in economics or a dry historical lecture. This is the pure, unadulterated story of a psychological butcher. Welcome to the Roaring 1000, to a Paris drenched in champagne and jazz. Welcome to the masterpiece of Victor Lustig, the phantom who looked at the most famous monument on Earth and saw nothing but a massive stack of poker chips. Spring winds tore through the Parisian streets, whistling violently as they struck the colossal 7,000-ton mountain of iron piercing the clouds. Today, the Eiffel Tower is the undisputed symbol of romance. But in 1925, it was a hated, decaying eyesore. Built as a temporary arch for the 1889 World's Fair, it was rusting alive. The paint was peeling in massive flakes, the structural maintenance was bleeding the city's budget dry, and the daily newspapers screamed with the same relentless headline, "When will this hideous iron monstrosity finally be torn down?" On one of those crisp mornings, sitting on the terrace of an absurdly expensive cafe, was a man immaculately dressed in a tailored suit, a silk handkerchief blooming from his breast pocket. He was sipping his dark coffee and reading that exact headline. His name was Victor Lustig. He did not carry a gun, nor did he believe in the brute force of a bank robbery. His weapon of choice was human nature. He read the article detailing the city's desperate financial crisis regarding the tower's upkeep. An ordinary man reads the news and complains. A genius reads the news and sees a blueprint. Lustig slowly folded the newspaper. He took one final, deliberate sip of his coffee, and a cold, chillingly elegant smile stretched across his face. In that fraction of a second, the greatest con of the 20th century was born. He was going to sell the Eiffel Tower. And he was going to sell it to the very men who considered themselves the apex predators of the Parisian business world. To build an empire of deception, you must first construct a flawless theater. People do not question authority when it is draped in absolute luxury. Lustig began by forging documents, but these were not mere pieces of paper. They were masterpieces of bureaucratic intimidation. Official letterheads of the French Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs, embossed government seals, and heavy watermark papers that carried the undeniable cold weight of state authority. He crowned himself with the title of Deputy Director General of the Ministry. Next, he booked a sprawling, opulent suite at the Hôtel de Crillon, the most prestigious hotel in Paris, the playground of foreign diplomats and royalty. Why? Because wealthy men are blinded by wealth. Luxury is the ultimate anesthetic for suspicion. Lustig sent highly classified, wax-sealed letters to the 6 wealthiest, most ruthless scrap metal tycoons in Paris, summoning them to his suite for a top-secret government initiative. When the 6 titans of industry walked through those heavy mahogany doors, they were met by the perfect bureaucrat. Lustig poured them vintage champagne and offered imported cigars. The air in the suite grew heavy with the intoxicating scent of state secrets. He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Gentlemen, as you know, the Eiffel Tower is beyond repair. The maintenance costs are breaking the back of our republic. Therefore, the government has made a radical decision. Secrecy is absolute. If the press catches wind of this, the public will riot. We are tearing the tower down, and we are going to sell the 7,000 tons of scrap metal to the man in this room who gives us the best offer." Lustig watched their eyes. He saw the spark ignite. These men were suddenly burning with the desire for unprecedented wealth and the ego-driven hunger to be the man who dismantled the Eiffel Tower. To seal the illusion, Lustig rented a fleet of limousines and drove them directly to the tower. Flashing his fake government badge, he casually bribed the guards and gave the tycoons a private tour of the rusting iron beams. They were no longer looking at a monument, they were looking at a gold mine. A seasoned predator does not attack the herd. He scans the perimeter for the most insecure, desperate, and vulnerable target. As Lustig watched the 6 men walking beneath the iron arches, his eyes locked onto his perfect victim, André Poisson. Poisson was a newly wealthy merchant. He had the money, but he lacked the pedigree. The Parisian high society constantly rejected him, treating him like a vulgar outsider. He was starving like a rabid dog for validation, for a seat at the table of great men. Lustig gracefully discarded the other 5 tycoons and focused his crosshairs entirely on Poisson, making him feel like the chosen one. But there was a wrinkle. Poisson was not entirely stupid. The extreme secrecy, the rapid pace of the deal, and his own wife's relentless warnings. This is too good to be true, André. There is something wrong with this man, began to plant the seeds of doubt. Poisson began to ask questions. The invisible strings of the trap were beginning to snap. A common street hustler would have panicked, broken character, or tried to over-explain. But Lustig was a maestro of the human mind. When Poisson arrived at the Hôtel de Crillon for their final meeting, his eyes were clouded with suspicion. Lustig did not try to reassure him with more grand lies. Instead, he deployed the most venomous, familiar truth of human nature. Lustig sighed heavily, slumping in his chair, dropping his rigid bureaucratic posture. He lowered his head in a beautifully acted display of shame. Monsieur Poisson, I must be completely honest with you. You know how government officials are paid. To maintain this lifestyle in Paris, to dress like this, to entertain men like you, it is incredibly difficult. I am the one making the final decision on this contract, but you understand, I must also look out for my own future. It was a demand for a bribe, and in that exact moment, something magnificent happened. Every single cloud of suspicion vanished from Poisson's eyes. A massive, relieved smile washed over his face. Why? Because in Poisson's cynical world, a flawless, honest bureaucrat was suspicious, but a corrupt, greedy government official demanding a kickback, that was undeniably perfectly real. To erase his victim's doubt, Lustig had sold him his own lack of morals. Poisson felt completely safe because he finally believed the man sitting across from him was just another politician who could be bought. The jaws of the trap violently snapped shut. The next morning, inside the quiet wood-paneled suite of the Crillon, sat a massive leather briefcase. It was stuffed to the brim with the millions of francs required to buy the Eiffel Tower, plus the hefty, illicit bribe Lustig had demanded. Lustig calmly accepted the money. He handed over the spectacularly forged contracts and the heavy state seals. He shook Poisson's hand with chilling composure, his pulse never rising above a resting beat. Congratulations, Monsieur Poisson. You are now the owner of the Eiffel Tower. You may send your demolition crews to the site tomorrow morning. Poisson walked out of the hotel with his chest puffed out, believing he had just conquered Paris. The moment the heavy doors clicked shut, Lustig dissolved into a ghost. It took him mere minutes to pack his tailored suits. Less than an hour later, he was sitting in the first-class compartment of a luxury train bound for Vienna, sipping a glass of fine cognac, the briefcase of millions resting gently on his lap. He left no fingerprints, no real names, no loose ends. He simply vanished into the wind. And Poisson? When he proudly marched to the base of the Eiffel Tower the next morning, flanked by cranes, demolition crews, and workers, he crashed headfirst into a brick wall of reality. The on-site officials looked at him as if he were a lunatic. There was no demolition order. There was no deputy director. The papers in his hands were utterly worthless. When the realization hit him, Poisson's entire universe collapsed. Yet the true, terrifying genius of Victor Lustig was revealed in the aftermath. Lustig knew Poisson intimately. He knew that for a man consumed by ego, there was a fate far worse than losing a fortune: public humiliation. To be exposed to the merciless Parisian high society as the idiot who bought the Eiffel Tower would destroy Poisson's legacy forever. Lustig had bet millions on his victim's pride, and he won. Poisson never said a word. He never went to the police. He never spoke to the press. He swallowed his catastrophic financial loss, wrapped his shame in absolute silence, and disappeared into the shadows. Victor Lustig had sold the Eiffel Tower, and the man who bought it was too embarrassed to even complain. If the story ended there, it would remain a legendary heist. But a true psychological butcher never stops slicing. Months later, after burning through the cash in Vienna, Lustig returned to Paris. He wore the exact same suit, He printed the exact same forged documents. He booked the exact same suite at the Hôtel de Crillon. And he gathered a brand new group of wealthy scrap merchants. Victor Lustig, armed with nothing but sheer, unadulterated audacity, attempted to sell the Eiffel Tower a second time. He had found the glitch in the human operating system. If a lie is colossal enough, people will inherently believe it. The human mind simply cannot fathom the audacity required to construct a lie of that magnitude. If someone is daring enough to sell the Eiffel Tower, it simply must be true, the victim rationalizes. He was only moments away from collecting the cash a second time before a slightly sharper merchant tipped off the police, forcing Lustig to flee, escaping justice once again. As you listen to this, it is wonderfully easy to laugh at Monsieur Poisson. You think to yourself, I would never be that stupid. I would never buy a pile of rusted iron based on a few shiny papers. Are you absolutely sure? Open your own ledger. Think about the Eiffel Towers you have bought in your own life simply because they were packaged in luxury and made you feel special. Think about the massive amounts of emotional equity you invested into toxic relationships that were nothing but beautifully forged lies. Think about the time, money, and energy you handed over to modern-day Lustigs, the influencers selling you crypto fantasies, the gurus selling you shortcuts to success, the people who feed off your desire to sit at the table of great men. The system has not changed. The Victor Lustigs of the world did not die. They simply upgraded their wardrobes. As long as your ego craves validation and your greed seeks a shortcut, there will always be a beautifully dressed phantom waiting in a luxury suite, ready to hand you the contract to your own destruction. The ledger is closed.